Let me give you a mic.
4 months of brutal, unforgiving, freezing, cold weather. And then we have this program, and it's 80 degrees outside. So I don't know. Maybe we should have had it earlier. I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you today. It seems like an incredible day. This whole thing started because I started having a conversation with the staff and some of the students, and I said, I'd like to have a political film festival. You know, and I started talking about, like, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and things like that. And everybody looked at me like, yeah, you know, times have moved on. People actually watch television. There's a lot of great shows on TV that speak to the drama of politics, the comedy of politics, and that's what young people watch. So I got back in my '64 Ford Fairlane and drove home. And the staff and the students put on this event, and I think it's a great thing, because there is a lot of drama in politics, and there's also sacrifice and nobility, and there's also a lot of selfishness and greed and farce, and so it's great to bring all of that to the fore, as only the people who you've heard from today can. And hopefully what it does is it continues to stir people's interest in the process, which isn't generally as dramatic as these shows, and it's not generally as tawdry as some of these shows, but it's all very important and meaningful, and that's why we have the IOP, and that's why we're working so hard to encourage young people to consider various aspects of the public arena as commentators, participants, candidates, strategists, but your presence here on this incredibly nice day speaks to your interest, and it's a pleasure to see you all. So thank you for being here, and thanks to the students and to the staff for putting it together. And have fun with the last panel.
Thanks so much, David, and thank you all for staying here for the entirety of the day. Incredible programming so far. My name is Will Fernandez. I'm the junior chair of the Student Executive Board here at the Institute of Politics, and boy, do we have a panel coming up right now. Before I introduce our panelists, I first need to apologize to my mom. My entire time here at the University of Chicago, I've just spent it watching all these TV shows instead of going to class, and I need to apologize to her because all the tuition money that went into just watching TV. In all serious note, the political drama and humor captured in shows like the ones represented tonight have really captured audiences of millions over the past 15 years and have shown us both a lighter and darker side of Washington, D.C. politics. So, without further ado, let me introduce all of our panelists to the stage. Beau Willimon, John Coles, Jonathan Alter, Richard Schiff, Bradley Whitford, Eli Attie, Jeff Perry, and Anna Chlumsky. All right. And also, let me introduce our moderator for the night, Mr. T.A. Frank. Mr. Frank is a consulting editor at Pacific Standard based in Los Angeles and is a contributing editor at the Washington Monthly and the New Republic, where he most recently published a front-page piece on the rise of DC-influenced TV shows and their role in American culture. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming tonight's final panel.
Hello? Oh, that's loud. All right. So it's Saturday night, and people are out in the town for a panel discussion. This is my kind of crowd. So thank you, the Institute of Politics, for having us here, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. We are here in this final panel to address the question, what can shows about Washington teach us? Specifically, what can these shows about Washington teach us? Richard Schiff said to me on the way here today, as I was noting the fact that there are 8 people on this panel, he said, that'll never work. So after that piece of encouragement, I'm going to do some organized chaos here. We're going to make it kind of like a dinner party without the dinner or the party. And just if you feel like asking a question, ask it of each other, interject. And I will try to keep things moderated and refereed. And I'll set a timer also, a duck timer in my pocket to make sure we stay somewhat on schedule. So I'll start a question actually bouncing off of something that Richard said in an earlier panel. That it's a perfect time right now for House of Cards, but not a perfect time for West Wing. Beau Willimon, do you agree?
Yes.
Elaborate.
I think first of all, it's always a perfect time for West Wing. I go back and watch episodes all the time. Yeah. I mean, that show in particular revolutionized network television, brought an intelligence to TV that, only shows like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere had. I mean, it really sort of raised the bar. And I mean, as I said earlier today, I don't think there's any one show that can completely dramatize Washington, D.C., all its complexities, all the different sorts of people that end up there. It's a vast, complicated place, and a lot of different shows, whether it's Alpha House or Veep or Scandal or Homeland or West Wing or House of Cards, all come at our own angle and collectively maybe have a little something to say about DC. But I don't think any one in particular can nail it or is reflective of a particular era. It's a big subject.
Richard, do you agree?
Just to defend my point of view, it's also a perfect time
Just
for the Wizard of
nice,
Oz.
Man.
What's that?
Just let me be nice.
Yeah, it's also a perfect time for Wizard of Oz, meaning that there are things that are great, and I admit that we had greatness in our show. There's always a time to yes. We can battle it out. There's always a time. I agree. There's always a time to watch it, but I was more talking about whether West Wing could happen now. Could it begin now? Given the culture, given the business, given the state of the media right now, all of those elements, I think, point to something of the nature of House of Cards, more so than it does the West Wing. But you can always go back and look at work that's wonderful. That's for sure.
And I think we could say right now that Washington's brand is about on par with Justin Bieber or other disasters out there. But nevertheless, Eli, when West Wing started, people were surprised that Washington was being portrayed as a nice place. Would people be any more surprised today than they were then?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, I think that Richard's right that there's something about House of Cards that sort of fits this maybe particular sort of cultural low point for Washington that I think, and also there's something about the TV business that's changed in the years between the West Wing and the start of House of Cards, which is that it's sort of the cable revolution and darker, more sinister, more sort of darkly complex characters I think can work on TV in a way that they weren't seen as working. But you have to remember that when the West Wing was, in fact, I believe, I didn't join the show until the third season, but I believe that the West Wing pilot was held back a year after it was written, partly because of the Lewinsky scandal and the fact that Washington was such a kind of a cauldron of seamy horribleness that it didn't want to be seen as kind of almost mocking how pathetic the real Washington was. So the West Wing was on the air at a time when people had a low opinion of Washington, which is pretty much always, unfortunately, except for a few, So I think a way to answer that question is that you can have a hopeful show in cynical times. It's probably harder and harder if the times are especially cynical as they are now. But the thing that I think made the West Wing successful was it was an antidote to what you were seeing on CNN. And so I don't know. I'm sort of thinking out loud. I think it's possible with the right combination of ingredients that something like that could work, but it's hard to know.
Is cynical truer? John Alter, your show is a cynical show, and you speak of trying hard to make it realistic. Does that make it truer that it is cynical?
Well, I don't know how cynical it is. I actually think that I can speak.
Show of hands. Do people think it's cynical, Alpha House?
I hate to
Not
say
cynical?
it, but a lot of people still haven't seen it, so
okay.
it's okay. So
Watch it,
I think I
people.
can speak for Gary Trudeau in this because I've discussed this with him. Neither of us are cynics, and you actually can't do satire and be a cynic. This is something that I discussed with Gary when we were first getting to know each other in 1990 when I wrote a long profile of him that we put on the cover of Newsweek. And if you're doing satire, whether you're Jonathan Swift or Gary Trudeau, it has to come from some kind of an idealistic place for it to have any kind of a resonance. You have to at least a hope for something better. And we have a John Goodman scene that we call the speech on the beach in episode 6 or 7, where he it's a very idealistic speech about where he thinks the Republican Party should be but isn't, and how his party has left him. He hasn't left his party, and so I certainly think that you can't be a true cynic and be a successful journalist, because otherwise, why would you work in such a low-paying profession? You have to have some sense of idealism that things can get better, or you wouldn't be able to get up in the morning and write the story. So I hope that buried underneath the often dark comedy, and there are obviously cynical moments in Alpha House, that it's not seen as a deeply cynical show.
Well, if we take perhaps the darkest show on the panel, that would be that represented by the gentleman to my left, Jeff Perry, who plays a self-described monster on Scandal, if I recall. You have a president there who actually makes George W. Bush look really good, I would say. He's choking Supreme Court justices to death in their bed. Is it too cynical to be true, or does it get at other kinds of truths?
I don't know, man. I mean, that's for the audience to judge.
Does it feel true to you when you're playing Cyrus Bean?
Again, look, to borrow from Shakespeare, if we assume that Shakespeare was using Hamlet to express his own opinion, that what we're supposed to do, hold the mirror up to nature, show virtue her own features, scorn her own image, the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. The very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. If we assume that's our job, does Scandal get at it? Does House of Cards get at it? Did West Wing get at it? Does Veep get at it? I thought Beau's response, boy, that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. This is a gigantic swath of human endeavor that Washington, D.C. represents. And all of these things touch the hem of authenticity. Scandal does not, for a second, try to be naturalistic. No. It borrows without conscience, every trick in the telenovela, soap opera, melodrama book, but I'm a big fan of it, even objectively, besides being employed, and I think Shonda's at something that's kind of subversive, and that you can laugh at me, but I think is in a tradition of Jonathan Swift, Sam Clemens, Charles Dickens, that is tremendously populist, while also trying to get at really authentic human behavior.
So, John Coles, you are another representative of the cynics faction here on this panel.
Sorry, that was a great answer.
Round of applause. Another member of the cynics faction here. Do you agree with?
I'm not cynical, nor do I think the show is.
Well, that's what I'd like to get to, because people think of House of Cards as both cynical and as a real education to Washington. I've had a lot of people tell me all about Washington thanks to having recently binge-watched House of Cards, and they want to tell me about the place. Respond to that fact that people are getting their education about Washington from House of Cards, or feel they are.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I would think that people get their education about Washington from many, many places. But I think the thing that makes House of Cards so extraordinary is that it's a show about what you guys were all talking about before, which is trying to get at some kind of truths about people and about what they'll do in certain situations. And I don't think it ever really set out to be a map of the way Washington works. I think that's sort of a, you know, that's the package that this drama is put in. So I don't think that's where it really starts from, nor is that the intention.
Beau said earlier that you have to have a little bit of light in the darkness for it to be real. Similarly, with The West Wing, we certainly had our share of darkness in the light for the same reason. The thing that's great about House of Cards, and cynicism is a very trivial word. I mean, to be a cynic means you're kind of dismissive. And I don't think any of these shows are dismissive. I think they touch the nerve of something very deep. And so to call them cynical is to trivialize them. To call them wrong or right might be a better way to look at it. But I forgot the rest of my statement. Good night.
I'm just fascinated that you you don't think that was part of the design of the show. So I'm interested in your reaction to, for instance, that the Chinese government is watching it for tips on how Washington really works. Is it?
But that's anecdotal. I mean, and I don't know, you know, if there's any truth to that. And, you know, all that stuff is wonderful to talk about. But whether or not it's, you know, has any bearing on policy or anything like that is very hard to gauge.
Let's rumble, man. It's getting weird. I love it.
This is what we want.
You know, it's true that I was going to say, stepping back from any of these shows as political shows, what I think is true is that you can't keep a TV show on the air. You can't captivate millions of people if they don't fall in love with the characters, which doesn't mean they have to admire the characters, but sort of want. The thing that's so different about TV, I think, than movies is you're inviting these people into your home, you know, sometimes many times a week if you're, you know, binge watching a series.
People use possessives about, you know, they'll say, that's one of my shows.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's very intimate, and anybody who's on one of these things, you realize that people come up to you because you've been, you know, staring at them in bed, you know? I mean, they think they know you.
Right. In the words of one TV creator, you know, people watch their shows, you know, while they're naked and ironing, you know. So it's sort of, I guess, it's a way of saying. You know that people were naked when they ironed. This was the
you
creator
can hurt
of Murphy
yourself
Brown,
that way.
is what she said. But my point is simply, so you have to, you know, whether the show's about politics or about bowling, you have to be riveted by Frank Underwood. You know, whether you like him or hate him or think what he's doing is defensible. I think the same is true with any of these shows, that you fall in love with the characters first, and then.
They're radically different genres that just, you know, share the same arena. They're different forms of storytelling. I don't know, for some reason I'm sitting here thinking, you know, in Greek plays, people sleep with their mother and yank their eyeballs out. I mean, weird shit. You know, there's many, yeah, only a couple of episodes.
Was that a scandal spoiler?
What? But I agree. They're just radically different ways. Nobody is pretending to be the accurate, objective, definitive story of Washington. I don't think.
I mean, look, all of these shows are heavily researched, right? Because if you're going to create any sort of world, you want a certain degree of authenticity. At times you have to condense or accelerate or fudge the rules. You want to know when you're. Is this on? Is that, yeah. You need to know when you're fudging the rules, you know, for the sake of drama or comedy or what have you. You know, so I think that there's a certain level of accuracy on the factual level. But that's the least interesting part. It's not the reason the show exists. You know, if you were going to do a show that took place, you know, about hot air balloon pilots, you're going to want to know as much as you can about aviation and the ways in which this is not a show that I think anyone wants to watch, so I'm not even going to go. I don't know. I kind of do, actually.
Well, why not?
I think in terms of, you know, there's that sort of authenticity which is factual, and then there's a sort of authenticity of the heart, you know. And I don't think if the name of this little brouhaha here is, what do these shows have to teach you about politics? I don't think they have anything to teach you about politics or anything else. I mean, I don't think art can teach you anything. I think that's a fallacy. I think what it can do is it can help unearth the things that you already know and give you a place to reflect. Or at times it can be as simple as the joy of being entertained. I have nothing to teach a 72-year-old widow who's lost 3 children and has suffered more pain in her life than I could possibly imagine. She knows a lot more about life than I do. But I can maybe, in a moment, in a scene, with great actors and directors and story, unearth something in her in a safe space for her to reflect. Or bring, a little bit of joy to her day by giving her something to laugh at,
Okay, but does that need to be in Washington? You say a show about hot balloon pilots wouldn't fly. I was about to say, sorry, but how hot they are! God, this is terrible. But how important? I mean, could any of these shows have been set outside of Washington and worked?
1 hour dramas or shows, you need conflict, and basically 1 hour dramas, for example, are soap operas, human beings who you're watching in an arena of inherent conflict, life and death, law and order, crime, evil and good. I have always thought that Washington is incredibly ripe, a great arena, because there is inherent conflict. The stakes are incredibly high. I used to say to Aaron, what are you going to do next? Like a show about a canning factory? I mean, after you've been writing about making the world a better place. And there's the additional theatricality of the political discourse that I think makes it a better arena.
Whenever you confine people whenever you put people in a confined space and it's more than one person in a room, you have politics and you have a play for power. It's why cop shows have always been fascinating. It's why Shakespeare wrote about kings, because of the power and the size of the families were so small. When I first saw the pilot version of House of Cards, I thought 2 things. One is Macbeth, with his great little asides and the power and the wife and the whole thing. And the other thing is I thought The Player, because it's more about Hollywood, because I live in Hollywood and I see that as Hollywood than it is about Washington. And they've said many times Washington is Hollywood for ugly people. So it's you have a lot of power in a small amount of a small number of people's hands, and the vying for power is what's fascinating to watch.
I always thought that West.
One more point, though. Sorry, I've been trying to shut him up for 15 years, and I'm finally succeeding. Is that the genre thing? Is that the West Wing was a romantic comedy, and House of Cards, and then you have the spoof, and you have the comedy, and then you have what I think it's shot like a horror show, like a horror film. I think it's beautifully, beautifully shot, very scary, very compelling, and all these different. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I'm kidding.
I also had an interesting.
He's not kidding, by the way.
No, I am kidding.
Not kidding.
I was just going to say quick.
This has been going on
John
for.
Cole.
No. It's just there's a wonderful essay about film noir that Paul Schrader wrote, sort of the essay on noir. And what he asked in that episode is not how all different film noirs, how they are different, but how they are the same. And that kind of what's interesting about this conversation too is what are the things that these different shows share as much as how they are different in terms of their relationship to Washington. And that'd be an interesting question to throw out as well.
Bradley?
I'm fascinated by, I know Aaron Sorkin's not here, but like on the question of intentionality, like I think we all agree that, these shows are really about power. It can be in any realm, and, horror movie, great analogy. And so it's about deeper human emotions and relationships than it is about the particular context that it's in. But in the case of The West Wing, as opposed to all the rest of these shows, you know, it seems to me, maybe I'm misreading Sorkin, but there's real intentionality. He wants to create an idealized version of what Washington should be, how politics should work, or in the case of my business, you know, how the news business should work in newsroom. And it seems to me that's a different mission than the rest of us saying, you know, hey, you know, we're not really trying to do anything here except entertain people.
You know, the one
I would actually disagree with that in a sense, because I think that if you were to say, you know, what is the intentionality here, it's about it's about politics in the sense of it's about how power is manipulated, and I think that's true in the sort of more Sorkin-like sort of romantic fantasy of what the way power is, whereas in House of Cards, it's a less romantic version of it, but it's the same dynamic that's at play.
I was just going to say, and I was not around when The West Wing was created, but the story that Aaron had told me back when I was working with him at The West Wing, he wrote a movie called The American President that came out a few years before The West Wing with Michael Douglas. Probably everybody here's seen it. And he was, as I understand it, he was researching that movie, and through Rob Reiner, got to spend some time in the early days of the Clinton White House. And I think hung around George Stephanopoulos and his assistant a bit, and I think was really just swept away by the idealism of those early Clinton days. And I'd mentioned this to John. There's a now obscure, though it shouldn't be obscure, TV show from the 80s called Tanner 88 that was set on a fictional campaign that was actually running alongside the actual other candidates in 1988, and it aired in real time, a very sort of quirky, ambitious show that only had like 10 episodes on HBO. And that was a big influence on Aaron, and it was these kids on an unlikely campaign who kind of were a family. So I just think in the same way that House of Cards is kind of a radical and revolutionary show now, back in the 90s, it was radical and revolutionary to show anything idealistic about politics, because all of popular culture had depicted it as so craven and bloodless and just these tacticians who would, you know, claw each other to death.
One thing that I wanted to ask, a nasty question. Everyone's being so nice about everyone else's shows here because we're all here today, but one show isn't here, no representatives from Homeland. So what do those guys get wrong? Can we trash Homeland a bit? What's wrong with that show? Does anyone want to go?
Why don't you?
Here's what's wrong. All right. I think Mandy should sing more in Homeland. No, and I know Mandy, and I really love him, but that's the opposite of what I wish. His singing is like nails on a chalkboard to me. But
Brother, can you spare a dime?
I love Homeland, and I know some of the Homeland people, and I'm not going to trash it, but it may be because there are all these other shows that the thing I always wished Homeland did is showed us Brody as a congressman. And it may just be because that was ground that was covered in so many other shows, but I remember watching the first...
He has actually no official duties as a congressman.
Yeah, like in
right,
the second
show.
season, or you just don't see them. I really wanted to see, like, does he give a speech on the floor? Like, what does he say to voters? It just didn't show even one moment of that, and I was always curious about it. So, anyway.
I mean, like, we're not like rappers who, like, you know, it's like you're not legit. You know, it's not like the Sopranos are pulling up to the West Wing going, "You're sentimental, you're bullshit." You know,
they wanted to.
That's a great gun sound, man.
But we can dream. We can dream.
I don't know. I was very scared those years we went to the Emmys together, and they were sitting in the row behind us.
Oh, Josh. There's a Josh Molina story. We, by the way, always thought that The Sopranos were going to win. I always thought they were going to win. Am I wrong?
I'm just looking at you because you're talking.
Am I wrong again? And we kept winning, and finally,
And winning and winning and winning.
And finally, Gandolfini was walking out one night and he said, I don't know why we come here anymore. And some reporter said to Josh Molina, do you have any reaction to this? Gandolfini said this, and he said, really? I thought he played Tony Soprano. I didn't realize he played Big Pussy. Great line. But those guys were scary.
Screw the meaningful discussion. Can we just do stories for the rest of us? I mean, isn't that really what you guys want?
All right.
Great idea, bro. Great idea.
Go. Yeah. You first.
Just silly stories from the set.
Well, John we should switch because you are part of both factions. John actually
Dual
directed
factions,
on the West
right,
Wing.
right.
You must have a story. Come on, go. Go, monkey, go.
Actually, I remember the first time when I directed West Wing, it was actually kind of terrifying because it wasn't the first season. I think I came in the third season, and it was sort of like stepping into someone's Maserati on this unbelievable race course, and you were going to have to go very fast, and it was a really great car, but you could wreck it. And, you know, it was that was the...
story, that's a metaphor.
Oh. All right, you give a story.
All great stories begin with metaphor.
I was kidding, whatever.
It's very hard, I think, for directors. You have to be an authority figure, and you're an outsider. It's really hard.
You could be a traffic cop, basically, if you're not careful.
Right.
I mean, that's ultimately what you...
And directors, I heard somebody said that directing's like sex. You've never...
Mike Nichols said that.
You've never...
You never see anyone else
You never see anyone else doing what you do, you know, unless you're really fascinating. But
those days have changed because of the internet.
I extend that metaphor by saying, as actors on the West Wing, we got fucked by somebody different each week. You know, I mean, you know, we see a lot of directors. I think bad writers overwrite, bad actors overact, bad directors overdirect.
Getting to John though, when he first
feel
came.
like that.
I got a version of that. To me, bad.
No, finish. No, he's got to finish.
No. No.
I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Finish the thought. Is it a joke? Is it a punchline?
No. He just...
Yeah, no, Bradley, what you said. To me, the only directors that drive me fucking crazy are the ones that absolutely preempt the 30 seconds to 1.5 minutes that actors are given to explore the possibilities of any given scene. The ones who absolutely preempt that and go, you will be walking over here, and you will sit on this, and you will do this, and anything else you do, I will cut. It's kind of like, wow, man. I thought it was a collaborative art. I guess not.
Listen,
I will bring this back to Washington.
He sounds like he's fun on the set, though. Huh? You sound like you're fun on the set, though. No.
No, it's only one of the 17 directors that we've had who shall remain nameless.
I remember, like, Allison, who could not be bad unless somebody, you know, you'd see a director going over because they want to, like, lay down their acting cred. Actually, I'm horrible with directors. If I'm totally honest, whenever any director's ever said anything to me, I go through 3 silent beats. Fuck you. I suck. Okay, what?
All right. That's excellent.
I love it.
But I have
So
to
to bring-
I have to speak to John Coles when he came on our show because my job on the West Wing basically was because Brad was self-hating and Allison had the tendency to cry sometimes, and I was the one that would. My job was to castrate the directors that came on and did too much.
I used to say that directing Richard was like trying to get a cat out of a tree.
All right. I'm going to get in between you two guys here for them.
Let me finish the thought, though, without interrupting. Actually, Aaron wrote in the book about the West Wing that directors get $30,600 and whatever dollars to direct 8 days of television, and when it comes to directing Richard Schiff, they earn every cent of it. But when Jonathan came to the set, And it was a very, very difficult scene for me in many ways. And it was, I noticed immediately where he placed the camera and the way he stayed out of the room almost, right? I mean, you weren't even in the room. And just by doing that, just by because actors know as soon as where the camera is placed, whether this guy knows what he's doing, basically. And because of that, and because of the way John was, and because of the nature of the scene, I started to go to a different place than I otherwise would have, because all my defenses were gone. And I proceeded to be very aware of the way he shot this scene. And it was the scene with when Will was introduced to me, I think, Josh Molina's character, and I was in a writing slump. And I ended up, I was in the cafeteria, I was smoking a cigar, and I loved his writing. And just so you know, it just like a director can probably tell an actor's talent the minute they walk in a room if they've not met him before. That's how talented John was apparent. His talent was to me.
Round of applause for John Coles here.
Oh!
This conference is going too long. I've lost
it is
my ability to
actually
speak.
it's close to the end, and to give it the illusion of a seamless structure that was just perfectly themed the whole time, I'm going to go back to a Washington question. Did any of you guys go into the show not knowing a lot and then come out thinking, I know quite a bit about politics now and I'm kind of versed up? Was that the arc for anyone? Has it been an education for you in Washington? Not for you, presumably. Like
I went in knowing a lot and I came out knowing very little.
Yeah.
I went the other way.
The reverse. Anyone have the opposite?
You know, I think a lot of us, and it was a very urgent time politically, and we were a lot of political junkies, and we had these amazing technical advisors, and it was a joyous dive into just endless political spitballing. And I learned a lot through that. You know, our task, you know, was really not about the research. Your task as an actor is to make the scene work, whatever the arena is.
I will say one thing. I want to just add one anecdote about Brad that
Bradley made himself sleep.
this might or might not wake him up, which is that, you know, particularly Richard and Brad, you know, deeply knowledgeable about politics, got to know a lot of politicians and became involved in campaigns. And, you know, they probably were always immersed in that, just as people who followed the news and read the paper. But I was sort of in transition from being a political operative to being a Hollywood guy when I arrived at the West Wing. And I remember one particular day that I arrived on the set of the West Wing, and Brad started telling me that literally he had woken up in the middle of the night. This is in the early Bush years. He woke up worried about the deficit projections, which I guess we're getting bigger. And you know, it wasn't a joke. He was telling me this story, and I realized in the middle of him telling me that I had a copy of Variety folded under my arm, and I kept trying to conceal it and lean away as he was telling me. Anyway,
me too.
That's my story.
You two have switched. Yeah. No one could be more politically ignorant and uneducated than I. When I got this gig, I had C-SPAN on the 3 TVs in the house.
That's good
and
TV.
Reaching for a Robert Caro, you know, LBJ book, and Hunter Thompson's Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail, and a Robert Kennedy thing over here, and a this and that, you know, in absolute terror, which all actors will empathize with, of, oh no, I'll be fired day 2.
And your instructions are go get people killed.
Yeah, and then no, honestly, when I have questions about authenticity or protocol, we've got people like you who were in White House press corps and now are writing on the show, and Judy Smith, who has been in the West Wing, and I'm able to go to them and to Kerry Washington a lot. She worked both Obama campaigns really intensively, and in any campaign land questions, I can go to her and go, ba-boom, what should I do?
For me, unless you want to move on, I can answer that question.
Last thing, and then I'm going to take questions from the audience.
Okay, for me, my history with politics was a little different. My mother was very, very much involved with early women's liberation movement and so on. I was more of a street guy. I mean, I was way on the fringe way on the left, and not that interested, having grown up in the Nixon era, you know, in mainstream politics. And in fact, a story I like to tell is I only knew Washington, D.C. really through the film of Tear Gas. I had never seen it clean until we went to film there for The West Wing and found out that it was a beautiful city, in fact. You know, and so this West Wing was 7 years of political science graduate school, learning from people like David Axelrod, and you know, that you guys are lucky enough to work with. But we had Eli Attie and Lawrence O'Donnell and Dee Dee Myers and Peggy Noonan and Marlon Fitzwater and all these people. So I learned way too much, way too much, because I can't react viscerally and angrily anymore, because now I know how complicated everything is. You know, so I can't just react from my own wallet. I can't just react like I used to, which is I don't want to go to war. Wait a second, there's all these complicated things which, if you keep thinking about, just go on for fucking ever. And it's too hard for me now. Now that I know this much, it's too hard for me to think about. So I'm watching daytime soap operas now.
Good choice, isn't it? Questions? Got a lot of questions. All right. You.
We have talked about today the timing of whether The West Wing could be as popular now or even be made now and have a kind of a happy, less cynical political political drama. But I just think it's interesting that for viewers, a lot of the people that I know and I've met and I have become friends with people over The West Wing got into it because of Netflix. So part of me wonders if you've even noticed that, if there's been a big shift, I'm guessing, of people who come up to you and know of it because of that. So even if you can say like the timing isn't right for it to be made, perhaps it clearly still is right, even if we're a bunch of liberal people who want to watch the show and who have this seemingly liberal.
At this point in time, we thought we would be has-beens that no one ever knew or heard of. Now we're has-beens that everyone has heard of.
You know, I'll bet also that House of Cards' success on Netflix has probably driven a fair amount of the West Wing Netflix traffic as well, you know, because just when you get a show like that that's in the conversation and everybody's talking about it, it does sort of revive interest in the topic.
People used to always ask me if you could do the West Wing about a conservative Republican White House, and I would always say no, because Republicans aren't funny and people don't want to watch them flirt, you know?
That's a really big problem for our show.
Yeah. No, but but the real answer, that's the joke answer. The real answer is, you know, you couldn't like have the music swell and, you know, we're in the Oval Office high-fiving each other saying, you know, we're drilling on protected land. You know? We got a tax cut for the top 1%. We got rid of food stamps. I mean, bum, 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 bum.
This gentleman here.
Okay, there seems to be a false dichotomy between the alleged idealism of The West Wing and the more grittier aspects of the other shows. And I say it's a false dichotomy because if you think you can go from being House Representative's whip to president, you're living in like fantasy land. So like, it's just as idealistic, it seems to me. No, yeah. I mean, but to say one's more idealistic than the other is kind of, it gives short shrift to the idealism that perpetuates the notion that a Frank Underwood could ascend so high in the political
Look at Gerald
scheme.
Ford.
Yeah. All right. Come on, now, you're the guy who said that.
I think you raise a really good point. Look, I also find the whole cynicism, optimism, idealism argument, you know, it's bullshit. Let's face it, because I mean, look, there are plenty of idealists out there who are deeply cynical. You know, I mean, anyone who's worked for an NGO for more than 3 years is a deeply cynical idealist. You know, and there are plenty of people that are non-ideological and complete optimists. And Francis is one of those people. I mean, he has no ideology whatsoever. He is pure self-interest, and his desire to get things done, to move forward, to achieve, to say, what is the impossible? And I'm going to make it possible. I'm going to think what's outside the box. I'm going to do what no one has ever done. That's a deeply optimistic perspective. The aims are different, than the idealists out there. But you're talking about fundamentally different worldviews, and it all sort of gets mashed up in a blender. And I don't think. I don't think that you can really look at a Frank Underwood as someone who is trying to destroy the world. In fact, he just is like, if they would just let me run it all, it would be great.
I think that one of the things that I love about House of Cards is that it fits really well with the moment we're in right now, like literally this week, which is LBJ nostalgia, right? So everybody, wants Obama, and even Obama, in some of his comments about House of Cards, you could tell there was a kind of a jealousy there, that he wasn't able to live in a time when he could get stuff done. And it's almost become like its own kind of, as Beau said, its own kind of idealism to live in a world where you can get things through and make things happen, and Frank Underwood can. So, in that sense, maybe our show is the more cynical one, because ours is like four goofy guys who don't get anything done.
George W. Bush actually said out loud, "It would be so much easier if I were a dictator," which is fascinating. But speaking of cynicism and idealism, people accuse the West Wing of being this idealistic kind of place. If you actually look at the accomplishments of the who's our president, Bartlett's administration, there weren't very many. And we had this discussion last week, a couple of weeks ago, where Frank Underwood has had more victories in 2 seasons than Toby Ziegler had in 7 years. The West Wing was about disappointment and compromise, and in that sense was much more realistic than people realize. We had very, very few victories. We put a Hispanic in the Supreme Court, and that's it.
No,
let's also over here. Just one final
Social
thing.
Security.
But
Social Security, which, by the way, no one. Toby solved Social Security.
Our idealized heroes. Let's not forget that, JFK, idealized hero, bought the election, or his dad did. Who really got civil rights reform through the Congress? It was LBJ, who did it through duplicity, manipulation, intimidation, and outright bribery at times. Abraham Lincoln, he defied the Constitution. He dissolved the Maryland and Kentucky legislatures illegally to prevent them from becoming part of the South. FDR he actually tried to stack the court so that the New Deal wouldn't be overturned. I mean, all of these people that we look to as our heroes.
Listen, Bill Clinton, I mentioned this in the earlier thing, invited the press corps to come with him to Little Rock so they could take a picture of him signing the death warrant of a mentally retarded man, because he's a liberal Democrat. He's got to be tough on crime. He doesn't fucking believe that in the death penalty, but he knew he couldn't run for president without it. And I like Bill Clinton.
This gentleman over here.
I've worked in presidential politics since the early '90s, and before that, I was a stand-up comedian, which was a transition that some on the dais share. But yes, thank you. But what I noticed most about working with actors, being a writer, being a performer, and then working with politicians is the one thing they share in common is a healthy lack of self-esteem. And that they all want to do something, and they're willing to take a risk that nobody else is willing to take because it's such a great reward. Now, have you found this at the intersection of politics and Hollywood?
I think somebody said something, Jude Ciccalella, you know him, actor? Backstage, and he goes, years ago, and he goes, he's reading the sports page, and he goes, I said, what? He goes, actors, athletes, politicians. They're all freaks who have to be in an arena of false heroicism. And I think that's true.
Ellen, I thought the Oscars, right? I thought Ellen DeGeneres had a great comment. She said, "No, listen, we know what's really important. It is love, it is family, and it is health. If you don't have any of those things, you usually wind up in show business." You know.
But I do think also, like Bill Clinton is an example, fascinating character. You know, there's a lot of smart people who are the smartest guys in every room. Very rarely are they the, you know, white trash son of an alcoholic, you know. And so he had this pathological, it was fascinating meeting him because, it's, you know, he just touches you and, you know, like really looks into your, you know, it's like he wants to seduce everything, including like Newt Gingrich. You know, and especially Newt Gingrich. And part of that, in the age of television, that geological need to, I need you, I love you, you know, as opposed to, I'm sorry, Al Gore going, I'm more qualified, you know. I don't have this huge hole in my soul, but I'm smart.
The interesting thing, and you know, the neediness that characterizes, with all due respect to the actors on the panel, that characterizes most politicians, also characterizes a large number of actors. And it's not, I'm sorry, Brad. You know, it's not.
I need you to change your mind
it's
on
not
that
really
subject.
It's not really. It's no really. Right, sorry, you can't handle the truth.
You know,
Aaron Sorkin
I know.
wrote. But so you know, this subject has really fascinated me, and I spent a lot of time on my last 2 books trying to wrestle with this in the context of Obama, right? Because he is missing this in his DNA, this fundamental neediness. It's not a lack of self-esteem. I think that's probably not, at least that wouldn't be the frame that I would put on it. But it is a kind of a neediness, and I, you know, I grew up in a political family. My mother was a politician in Chicago, and I know it firsthand, and I also saw it in Bill Clinton and many other politicians I covered over the years. That's part of where their success comes from. So Johnson, hugely needy individual, as you can tell by reading about him. So the question with Obama that fascinates me is that he is missing the schmooze gene, and that, you know, I don't actually think it's hampered him that much in the presidency because of the structure of the Congress, but it's just interesting in terms of who he is, and that he got as far as he did without that fundamental neediness. On some level, as one of his top people, not Axe, said to me, he doesn't really care that much whether you like him or not. And that is extraordinarily rare in politicians, and I hate to say it, extraordinarily rare in actors.
You know,
well, we got a window into that in his, you know, the disastrous, was it his first debate where he's like, yeah, the second you know, it's like, this is stupid. Yeah, you know, that's dumb what he said, and, you know, I'm not going to zing anybody or anything, you know.
The one thing I wanted to add to this in defense of Hollywood, I suppose, is that when I first moved to LA, I know we have to move on, a lot of people asked me to kind of compare actors to politicians. You know, they must be similar types of people or have similar ego needs. And I, having worked closely with a lot of politicians and now having worked closely with a lot of actors, I actually think politicians have far greater ego needs, and that there's no, the vainest, most narcissistic actor you could possibly find doesn't need on a visceral level to hear 10,000 people chant their name at a rally.
Let me introduce you to a few people.
Mandy Patinkin. Mandy Patinkin, 2014.
I stand correct.
All right, folks, 2 more questions. We've got one line up here.
Hi. Okay, so as someone that has grown up on The West Wing and enjoys all the other shows featured here right now, I'm going to ask this question to this panel of gentlemen, but I've found female role models in all of your shows in ways that I've not found female role models in almost any other show. in CJ and Olivia Pope in Jackie.
And we're well represented here today.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's kind of a silly question to, but I know the Veep representative's a chick, but whatever. Yeah, so my question, I guess, is do you think there's, I mean, obviously you guys just have amazing shows and amazing writers write females well, but do you think that there's some reason that there's these strong female role models in all these shows about politics when maybe it's such a male-dominated sphere? I don't know.
You know, I can give one small answer with regard to the West Wing, just from the standpoint of somebody who wasn't there at the beginning, didn't have anything to do with the creation of the characters, and then came in as a writer trying to sort of understand the different characters and how to write them and how to sort of treat them. And there were a number of writers my first season on the West Wing who were always pitching stories for CJ to Aaron Sorkin. Well, what about, you know, she's getting into her 30s and late 30s, and doesn't she want a baby? And, you know, is she happy that she's, you know, is she making choices in her life? And this is probably oversimplifying it, but I feel like Aaron was militantly insistent to never go there. He basically said she lives in a universe she created for herself. She loves her life. And so then, as a writer of the show, I feel like we were just encouraged to write her as just another character. You know, in a sense, as a male character, in that she wasn't pining for something other than what she had, which was a revelation, I think.
It's the very reason why I absolutely love the female characters on House of Cards, because they're whole. They're women that are dealing with whether they're going to have children or not. They are dealing with sexual assault. They are dealing with the whole gamut of what it is to be a woman in what's become a male-dominated sphere. But you don't lose your, from what I understand from my wife and from Gus's mom, you don't stop being a woman, you know, and the characters that they're writing on that show for women are just phenomenal for that reason.
Well, I think. Sorry, go ahead. Well, I said this a little earlier today, but one of the first things I said to Fincher when we were talking about House of Cards is that this had to be a show more than anything about a marriage of two equal parts, where Claire and Francis combined would be this force of nature, you know. And I think it started there with us. And then, of course, Robin Wright brings so much strength and complexity to every role that she tackles, but particularly this one. And I guess I sort of tackled it this way. I mean, first of all, you hire women writers. That's like a given, which is hard to do sometimes because the WGA is 85% men, which is terrible. So that's a problem. But one of my favorite writers of all time is Balzac. And one of the reasons I think he's so great is, and if you only read 2 books in your entire life, read Anna Karenina and read Lost Illusions by Balzac. Balzac's women are treated absolutely no differently than the men insofar as they're just as insidious, duplicitous, power-hungry, petty, jealous, evil, ugly as everyone else. You know, that no one is treated with any kid gloves. And I think that, you know, on the one hand, you can, on one extreme end of the spectrum is misogyny or negligence. And on the other is this sort of putting up on a pedestal, you know, and this sort of, you know, shiny white marble condescending exterior without much depth. And really where most of humanity lives is somewhere in the middle. And look, I'm glad that you brought it up, you know, that there is, you know, there are definitely stories and aspects to life that are particular to gender. You know, I mean, Claire going through perimenopause is not, it would be weird if Francis was going through that, you know? I mean, Kevin could
a very special House of Cards.
If anyone could pull it off, it might be Kevin. And some days I think he is going through perimenopause. But you know, it's sort of like, you want to pay attention to the things that make these characters themselves, and part of that is your body, and part of that is the culture you live in, and part of that is your upbringing, and gender plays into all those things. But you don't want it to be reductive. You don't want that to be the defining characteristic of that character. You know, where a woman's character is defined by gender, but that her gender is part of her life, just like for a man, his gender is part of his life. And I think that that's, you know, actually it's not that hard to do. You know, when it really comes down to it, it's you kind of have to be, you know, gender blind and in the body, which is a kind of weirdly schizophrenic thing at first, but it really is what I think writing's all about.
Last question, brief answers, and well, thank everyone.
Hi, so I guess all of the shows that you guys have worked on seem like they've sort of orbited around the White House a little bit, and it seems like one reasonably popular political show that's sort of been left out of the conversation is Parks and Rec, which like focuses on these really tiny, that focuses on these really tiny issues of local government. And I'm curious whether, as sort of people who have like worked on, I guess like a lot of shows about politics, is it impossible, or is it possible for there to be more shows or more pieces of political art that focus on things that are smaller than like the sexiness of the White House and the president?
The Parks and Rec folks are with the Homeland folks up at Northwestern right now, so you came to the wrong, yeah.
Very needy actors, very all of them.
Listen, I think there are many arenas. I actually think, Eli, you used to, didn't you think a show about a mayor? I mean, there's all this talk now about politicians, ambitious politicians. I don't know if you have any experience with this, really want to be mayors, because you can actually get shit done. I think a show about a mayor would be fascinating. I mean, you can always play with the scale. Yeah.
So they did that Spin City about New York. But one of my favorite shows right now is nonfiction, Chicagoland on CNN. You know, I think it's a really interesting show. And there are a lot of possibilities for doing shows that are not on the White House. But before I forget, I want to slip in a little bit of a tease for our second season, because somebody sitting in this room, David Axelrod, will appear as himself in an upcoming episode in the White House. Because sometimes when you do need a little, we don't have too many scenes in the White House, most are in the Senate, but you know, when you need a little jolt, you do want to go
but
to the
acting is so
institution.
difficult and complex. How can a non-professional possibly
He's playing
walk
himself.
in front
We
of
have
a
a lot.
camera?
I mean, we had Anthony Weiner playing himself last season, so you know, can do it.
There's
He
also
plays himself a lot.
And on that note,
but we just asked The Wire, by the way, it was
best,
the greatest show of all time.
Best show ever.
Ever. It's like the bar to which everyone aspires and never gets close. I mean, the way that politics portrayed, particularly in the third season, and the way that institutions and the intersection between, you know, cops on the street all the way up to the mayor's office in a mid-sized town in America is probably the most sophisticated and accurate. Accurate portrayal of politics.
If you haven't seen that show, watch that show. Yes. It's better than all of ours.
Okay. Well, thank you again to the Institute of Politics for thank you for putting together a wonderful panel. Thank you, wonderful panelists, for providing us with such insight.
And thanks to T.A. Frank for leading that final conversation. Thank you so much
sir.
for that. Thanks to everybody for being here on our panel. We can't thank you enough for your time. Thanks to all of you for being here. We invite you out to the lobby for reception, and hope to see you back for another one of these very soon with more shows to talk about. Thanks again.